Ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, then we best get started.
You two are the worst performing teachers in this school.
I'm not sure I can do it anymore.
There's only one way out.
He's got to go down.
If he won't stop and we won't stop, then it's a race.
The best spring on TV. Press red to watch now on BBC iPlayer.
This is BBC One in the East. Now the BBC News with Clive Myrie and Angie George at 10 o'clock.
Tonight at 10, the government wants to house migrants in former military bases to cut a hotel bill of more than £6 million a day. It's all part of moves to deter tens of thousands of people crossing the Channel in small boats.
Accommodation for migrants should meet their essential living needs and nothing more. Because we cannot risk becoming a magnet for the millions of people who are displaced and seeking better economic prospects.
There's no point in blaming everyone else because they are in charge. The asylum system is broken because they broke it.
The former military bases are in Lincolnshire and Essex, and there's another site in East Sussex. Also tonight.
Good evening. Look at this T-shirt. Lil, dead common.
Tributes from the Queen Consort, among many others, to the entertainer Paul O'Grady, who's died at the age of 67. The scandal of one of Police Scotland's main control rooms using a dummy system to manipulate response times. And one of the biggest animals ever to walk the earth, the skeleton of a Patago Titan dinosaur, soon to appear in London.
Here in the east, as the hunt continues for two men after a woman is killed during a robbery in her own home, other residents speak of their fears. And getting runway ready, the tarmac at Stansted gets a makeover.
Good evening. The government has announced plans to house migrants in two former military bases in Essex and Lincolnshire and at a separate site in East Sussex in a bid to cut rising hotel bills. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, says the bases could hold several thousand people. The Refugee Council warns the plans are entirely unsuitable, but Mr. Jenrick insists the sites are in the national interest, with more than £6 million a day currently being spent on hotels. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has our top story.
This is where migrants could soon be living in Essex. It's a former Air Force base, RAF Wethersfield, which the government wants to turn into accommodation for asylum seekers, with 1,700 people here eventually. The plan is big sites providing cheap, basic housing.
We have to deliver them to save the British public from spending eye-watering amounts accommodating illegal migrants. And we have to deliver them to prevent a pull factor for economic migrants on the continent taking hold.
In other words, stopping people coming to the UK by putting them up here rather than in a hotel. But this is what the local reaction looks like to something the government reckons is in the national interest. Bluntly, plenty don't want migrants moving here.
Completely the wrong place, no facilities, rural, if they need any sort of services. I mean, we're talking anything, medical, dentistry, or if you're talking about emergency services, it's so rural that they can't possibly get those, not in any sort of time scale.
And the local authority is trying to stop it at the High Court. The thing is, the number of migrants arriving in small boats has rocketed. 51,000 asylum seekers are currently living in nearly 400 hotels at a cost of more than £6 million a day. The government has talked up the prospect of using ferries and barges to accommodate people, but there was no detail at all about this today.
They are flailing around in a panic, chasing headlines, barges, oil rigs, Rwanda flights, even wave machines, instead of doing the hard graft. They have lost control of our border security, lost control of the asylum system, lost control of their budget and lost control of themselves.
The Liberal Democrats say the biggest failure here is the colossal backlog of asylum claims yet to be processed.
Would he agree with me that there is one thing worse than his and his government's incompetence on this issue, and it is the blaming of the consequences of that incompetence on the most vulnerable people in the world?
The issue of asylum seekers in general and small boat crossings in particular has made news for years. What is different now is the scale of it. The number crossing in boats has shot up massively, and this is such a difficult issue to resolve. It takes in international relations with France, for instance, national politics here, and then local rows. And to prove just that, another proposed site at this former RAF base in Lincolnshire faces opposition too, with the local authority here also exploring all legal options to stop it. And you might remember the Prime Minister has promised to stop the boats. And at least part of what we're seeing at the moment is a consequence of the government's failure to do that. But there is a far bigger generational challenge here. It's never been easier for poor people in poor countries, or those caught up in war or natural disasters, or perhaps in future the impacts of climate change, to see via smartphones and the internet how the richer world lives. And so richer countries, including the UK, need to work out how they're going to approach that politically, practically, logistically, financially and morally. And it won't be remotely easy.
OK, Chris, thank you. Chris Mason there at Westminster. The Queen Consort has been among those paying tribute to the presenter and entertainer Paul O'Grady, who's died at the age of 67. His husband says he died unexpectedly but peacefully last night. Sir Elton John thanked him for all the joy he brought into the world. Our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson looks back at his life.
Good evening. Look at this T-shirt. Lil, dead common.
The brilliance of Paul O'Grady. He may have broken through with a radical subversive drag act, but ended up being trusted with such cosy institutions as Blankety Blank, an ITV tea time show and a Sunday afternoon slot on Radio 2. And he was even loved by royalty. Last year, the Queen Consort appeared on his programme For the Love of Dogs in a special celebration of the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. Today, she was one of the first to pay tribute, saying she was deeply saddened to hear of his death and he had provided lots of laughter and waggy-tailed memories. His death was a real shock, as he was on stage playing Miss Hannigan in Annie as recently as Saturday night in Edinburgh.
Paul was born to either be on a stage, be behind a radio microphone, be on a camera. He was meant to entertain people, and that's what he did right up until last Saturday night. He was one of the cleverest people that I've ever worked with. His brain for comedy was quite remarkable. There was only one Paul O'Grady, and there'll only ever be one Paul O'Grady.
This is where Paul O'Grady grew up, Holly Grove in Birkenhead on the Wirral. And in the centre of the town, people were still coming to terms with the news.
Can't believe it, everyone around here,
everyone in Birkenhead has got something to say about how he'd be so missed.
He was down to earth, he was the man of the people, and he just loved animals, didn't he? And I think that's what it was. That Battersea programme was amazing. Yeah, he was a lovely, lovely man. He'd be sadly missed.
Paul O'Grady was a care worker in London when he created his alter ego, the Scouse powerhouse, Lily Savage. He was still a prominent gay rights activist and inspired a whole new generation of drag queens.
I remember watching Paul O'Grady as a kid, and as a young gay boy, to sit there and see something of yourself on television. It meant things were okay, and it meant, I could dream to do that as well. So it's a really sad day.
He broadcast his final Radio 2 show after 14 years last August and signed off in the manner which made him so loved by many.
So you look after yourselves, yeah? Stay safe and well. Ta-ra, everyone.
The entertainer Paul O'Grady, who's died at the age of 67. Scotland's new First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, has appointed his first cabinet after being formally sworn in. His top team of 10 has 6 women, and he says he's sorry his former opponent for the leadership of the SNP, Kate Forbes, isn't one of them. She declined his offer to become Rural Affairs Secretary. Here's our Scotland editor, James Cook.
This is a warrant under His Majesty's signed manual appointing Hamza Haroun Yousaf to be First Minister of the Scottish Government. First,
Hamza Yousaf making history.
You swear that you will well and truly serve His Majesty King Charles in the office of First Minister of the Scottish Government. Will you now sign the parchments?
He met his first test, a pen and parchment problem, with a wry smile. And then it was official. Scotland had a pioneering First Minister, the only Muslim, the only descendant of immigrants ever to hold the post.
How are you feeling? Oh, really excited, and it's just such a proud moment for my family and for me. I'm delighted that I've got the ones that I love the most with me.
And with that, he was whisked away to work, assembling his cabinet, with Shona Robertson becoming Deputy First Minister and also taking over as Finance Secretary from a woman who was already home in the Highlands. The glaring absence from this team photo is Humza Yousaf's leadership rival, Kate Forbes. The result of the contest shows that she has a lot of support among party members, though, and so the question for this new First Minister is, can he reunite his party without her?
Kate is rightly popular, and she's got some great ideas and exceptionally talented. I'm sorry that she didn't feel she was able to continue in government, but she is still a member of this party.
The First Minister has put his faith in this team, with 5 cabinet members under the age of 40 and for the first time a majority of women. Yet more history in the making. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
The Vatican tonight says Pope Francis has contracted a respiratory infection and will need to spend a few days in hospital in Rome. He's 86 and has had breathing difficulties in recent days. The Vatican says he doesn't have COVID. This is the busiest time of the year for the Pope, with many events and services scheduled in the run-up to Easter. Some victims of crime, particularly those who've been raped or sexually assaulted, have complained for years that they felt let down by the police, prosecutors and the courts. Now, the government is promising new laws in England and Wales, allowing victims to be kept informed of what's happening with their case and if it's to be dropped, so they can appeal. It's all part of the Victims and Prisoners Bill, which also gives ministers the power to block parole boards releasing some prisoners. Here's our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
What happens when you make a rape allegation? Jennifer, not her real name, has been re-traumatised by the police experience. This isn't her real voice, to protect anonymity.
Terrible. There's just no other way to describe it other than terrible from start to where I'm at now. It's been incredibly slow. It's been incredibly stressful. I don't feel like I've been given the support I should have been as a victim.
What was lacking from the police?
Emotional support is the biggest thing you expect. I was almost made to feel like the perpetrator of the situation, so less like the victim, more like I had committed the crime. Mostly, it's the lack of updates and just the time delays with everything.
The government say they want to improve things for victims. Do you think these plans will work?
I personally don't think it's going to make a difference. It's coming from the right place, but if the police aren't willing to make a change, then it almost falls on deaf ears.
The figures are stark. Only 1.6% of rape allegations end in a charge. And on average, rape victims are waiting nearly 2.5 years from when they report a rape to the end of a case.
He has served under 5 Tory...
Anger and accusations about this situation in the Commons.
On his watch, rapists are left to roam the streets. So will he apologise to those victims who will never get justice because of his failures?
Yeah. The Justice Secretary defending their record.
The conviction rate has gone up. It is now at 69%. We are doing much more to support the victims of rape when they come forward. Well, they're talking a good game. In fact, we have quadrupled funding for victims since 2010.
But the former Victims Commissioner, a new one still hasn't been appointed, is disappointed.
The bill will have no effect whatsoever on delays. That's a matter of poor funding for the courts historically, and it is now absolutely intolerable that vulnerable victims like rape victims have to wait.
There was an outcry when the taxi rapist John Warboys was about to be released on parole. Now the Justice Secretary plans to give himself the power to block the release of dangerous prisoners, even though there's a warning it could cause legal issues and bills. Victims first, the aim, but their support has been so stretched and their experiences so poor. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Documents seen by the BBC show that one of Police Scotland's main control rooms employed a dummy system to manipulate response time targets over a period of at least 8 years. An internal system registered thousands of calls to the Bilston Glen control room in Midlothian as having been passed to officers, but in reality they'd just been logged on a list. It meant in many cases police vehicles weren't dispatched quickly to emergencies or they didn't turn up at all. BBC Scotland's investigations correspondent Mark Daly has the full story.
Lamara Bell and John Newell died in July 2015 after their crash on the M9 was left unattended for 3 days by police. Police Scotland admitted their call handling system was at fault for the tragedy. Now, the control room involved, Bilston Glen in Midlothian, is under further scrutiny. The BBC can reveal that for at least 8 years up to March 2015, Bilston Glen was operating a dummy call handling system to manipulate response times, giving the appearance police performance was better than in reality. It also led to many calls going unattended. Internal police documents obtained by the BBC under Freedom of Information revealed the practice was designed to prevent the activation of internal alarms and provide artificial levels of incident management performance. They would assign a job to the dummy call sign, and the internal systems would think that job had been allocated to a police car and response time targets were being met. But in reality, the job would slip to the bottom of the controller's priority list and may end up not having a police car sent at all. The practice was stopped 4 months before the M9 tragedy, but the lawyer who acted for the Bell family says they should have been told about it.
I'm astonished, to be perfectly honest. I think that puts the wider public at risk if calls are not being actioned, and to not respond to them or to put them into a dummy system whereby there's no guarantee that they'll come back to them is quite shocking, to be honest.
Based on a snapshot of the number of times the dummy call sign was used, the BBC estimates that over the 8 years in both forces, more than 4,000 Priority 1 calls where there is a threat to life or serious crime in progress may not have been attended. In a statement, Police Scotland said, the dummy call sign was a practice which had been in use by one legacy service since 1997 to assist controllers to allocate resource during periods of high demand. The practice should not have continued under Police Scotland, and local use of the call sign in one service centre was halted in January 2015 when a new command and control system was introduced. The practice was permanently discontinued in March 2015. The police's call handling problems of 2015 are now likely to come under renewed focus. Mark Daly, BBC News.
King Charles has been attending a state banquet in Berlin this evening on the first day of his official visit to Germany. He's vowed to strengthen the ties between the two countries and became the first head of state since the Second World War to be honoured with a full ceremonial and military welcome at the Brandenburg Gate. His first overseas trip as monarch was supposed to have begun in France, but protests against raising the pension age there meant that was postponed. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has more from Berlin.
White tie and tiaras for the state banquet. But don't be too dazzled by all the diamonds and decorations. The first state visit of King Charles's reign represents a serious mission set by the British government. The focus is Europe, the setting is Berlin, and the King's language initially was German.
Es ist wunderbar, heute Abend in so großer Gesellschaft zu sein.
Then, in English, this commitment.
Throughout the time that is granted to me as king, I will do all I can to strengthen the connections between us.
And this on Ukraine.
We stand side by side in protecting and advancing our shared democratic values. This is epitomized so clearly today as we stand together with Ukraine in defense of freedom and sovereignty in the face of unprovoked aggression.
The King had received the first full ceremonial welcome at the Brandenburg Gate for any state visitor. He inspected the Guard of Honour, standard fare for a state visit, but it's the subtext on these occasions that matters, and that is very clear. State visits are all about the big picture, the core elements in the relationship between the host and the visiting nation. In this instance, of course, with the UK now outside the EU, it's all about the bonds, the links that remain. It's about shared histories and shared values, friendship between two European nations.
I don't understand here too long.
No, it's fine.
It's a message which will be repeated when the King becomes the first British monarch to address the German federal parliament. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Berlin.
The UK government's own advisers say it's not doing enough to prepare for the weather extremes caused by global warming, and England now faces a make or break moment. The latest report from the Climate Change Committee says there'll be an increased risk to life and infrastructure unless current policy changes. Here's our climate editor, Justin Rowland.
We got a glimpse of Britain's climate future last summer. Wildfires spread to homes in East London as temperatures hit record highs. Trains were cancelled as equipment failed. The tarmac melted, closing Luton Airport, and a national emergency was declared as heat-related deaths hit record highs. Frontline medical staff saw the effects firsthand.
That period of intense heat had a profound impact on the volume of patients that needed urgent care, and this resulted in delays and cancellations in planned operations.
The government's advisers say the NHS isn't the only institution that needs to do much more to prepare for the weather extremes our changing climate will bring. The recent shortage of fresh vegetables was blamed in part on unseasonable weather in Europe and shows how vulnerable our food system can be. Many of our homes overheat in summer. The report says no part of society in England is adapting fast enough.
Our report is saying the government has not done enough. It's wasted the last 10 years. We've had a lost decade with not enough preparation for the climate change we've got now and, of course, the increasing impacts of climate change that are to come.
Every sector and all planning decisions need to take into account the impact of our changing climate, she says. The UK government has welcomed the report and says it will robustly address the full range of climate risks to the UK.
It's not all bad news. There are some examples of effective adaptation. The vineyards here in Kent, for example, are already choosing grape varieties that will thrive in our increasingly hot and dry summers.
We've been able to ripen the traditional grapes of Champagne, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. They were not able to be ripened in the 1960s and 70s. So agriculture, the climate is changing, and we're moving with that to make the best wines from our countryside.
The grapes may be doing well, but today's report says that without more preparation, the rest of us are likely to struggle. Justin Rowland, BBC News, Kent.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to find affordable rental accommodation in the UK, with figures from the property website Zoopla suggesting available properties have fallen by a third in the past 18 months. The sharp drop in the number of listings has driven up rents for new tenants by 11%. As part of the BBC's Rental Health Week, listeners and viewers from across the UK have been in touch about their experiences of the rental market. Here's Coletta Smith.
As you can see, underneath, it's completely disgusting. All the wall is waterlogged.
Chiara and her husband complained about mould and damp in their London flat and were issued with a Section 21 eviction order in January.
There's like water between the panes.
And we've been following their house hunt.
So yeah, good location, 1,500 for a one bed. This is the kitchen, yeah, there's the garden. She's had enough of being dragged around flats all week. Our old letting agent emailed to say like they're keeping our full deposit. He said I spent all day yesterday trying to sort that out and just spent all evening just crying.
According to a YouGov survey conducted on behalf of the housing charity Shelter, tenants who complained to their landlord were more than twice as likely to be handed an eviction notice than those who hadn't.
So I first reported this to the landlady at least a year ago.
It happened to David and Samira in North Yorkshire too.
they said that she was going to issue us with a Section 21, which is a no-fault eviction, because of us complaining essentially from the damp. It was just before Christmas, wasn't it? And you were 6 months pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And just that feeling of, well, hang on a minute, I've paid my rent every month on time, if not early, most months. And now all of a sudden I've got 2 months to get out.
In England, the government have promised to ban no-fault evictions by the summer, but that's not helping tenants facing the rental crunch now.
It is quite difficult sometimes to challenge, which is why we're saying that we just need to get rid of Section 21 and have a situation where landlords can evict people for legitimate reasons and can't evict them just because they complain about the poor condition of their home.
But there's another side to this situation.
You need to understand that we're also people as well.
Lou's been a small-scale landlord for years. His mortgage payments have doubled in recent months, and he says he had no choice but to evict a tenant in Sheffield who stopped paying rent a couple of years ago.
How much did it cost you, that whole process of eviction?
It cost me over £20,000 in total, with well, if you take into account lost rent, the fact that I was paying out for everything, all the costs associated with. I then had to get legal support. I used to really enjoy this, I hate it now, I really do. And to be quite honest, I can't wait to get out of it.
And fewer properties available to rent means more pressure and higher prices for tenants. David and Samira have found a new home, just in time for the arrival of little baby Ayla this week. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
And you can find out how much rents have gone up in your area, what your rights are when renting, and get tips on how to secure a new home. Just head over to the BBC News homepage and check out the section entitled Cost of Living, Tackling It Together. The Liberal Democrats have accused the Conservatives of making the cost of living crisis worse as the party began its campaign for the local elections in England in May. The party's leader, Sir Ed Davey, says the government has crashed the economy and added hundreds of pounds to people's monthly mortgage payments. Here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Breaking down what they call a blue wall of Conservative support, the Lib Dems gave their now familiar message a rural spin to launch the party's campaign for local elections next month.
Hi, everybody!
The theme continued as the Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey took his tractor to Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire this morning, one of many rural areas where council seats are up for grabs. His focus, the cost of living and health services, which he claims are on the brink.
Well, on the 4th of May, the British people can send the Conservatives a very strong message that they're fed up with them, that they think they've betrayed our country, and they can vote for Liberal Democrats who've got strong local champions fighting for their communities. They can elect Liberal Democrat councils to deliver a fair deal, and they can make sure that Liberal Democrats are in a strong position to defeat many Conservative MPs at the next general election.
But while the Lib Dems may be taking aim at the government, voters here are weighing up local issues too.
Council tax prices, bills are obviously crippling a lot of people at the moment.
Graffiti and litter and all those things affect me the most. Housing obviously is very important.
Local environment, building, schools, the NHS where they can help.
Coming to traditionally Conservative, relatively rural areas like this part of Hertfordshire shows the Lib Dems are increasingly confident about winning over former Tory supporters in the local elections across England. But for a party on the margins at Westminster, the challenge is to be the most attractive option as voters make up their minds. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Hertfordshire.
One of the biggest animals ever to walk the earth, a Patago Titan dinosaur, is about to go on display at the Natural History Museum in London. Now, its huge bones were discovered more than 10 years ago in Argentina. It's a replica skeleton that will be on show, but that means the public will be able to touch it and walk beneath it. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, has that story.
Piece by piece, bone by colossal bone, a creature from 100 million years ago begins to emerge. This is Patago Titan, one of the largest dinosaurs ever to walk the earth. Assembling this dinosaur is like putting together a giant 3D jigsaw puzzle. There are more than 500 bones and fixings, but no instruction manual. This beast measures 37 metres from the tip of its nose all the way down to its tail, and it just about squeezes into this room with a few twists and turns along the way. The Titanosaur is a cast, an exact replica of the original fossilised bones. And getting a creature like this into a 140-year-old building has been a challenge.
We've had to take some of the doors off in order to get the crates and different parts of the dinosaur in, and some of the bones and the cast itself are quite heavy, so we've had to reinforce our floors. That sense of awe at standing under one of the largest animals to have walked on land and trying to imagine it as a living, breathing creature is, yeah, it's amazing.
The bones were unearthed at a ranch in Patagonia in Argentina just over a decade ago. As scientists got to grips with the scale of their find, they were joined by Sir David Attenborough. He also got a chance to see what this titan of the Cretaceous period might have looked like. Now the exhibition's complete, the dinosaur's ready for its moment in the spotlight.
So one of the first things you notice is a huge toothy grin with these pencil-like teeth. They're constantly on the move, would have been just feeding machines, constantly using those heads to stuff more and more leaves and twigs and so on into its body just in order to keep it moving around.
Patago Titan still holds some mysteries. No one knows why these creatures grew so big or how they came to die out. But their size and their success for millions of years puts our own existence into sharp perspective. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Does indeed. Now, time for a look at the weather news. Darren Bett is here. Enough of the rain, Darren.
I know,
Enough,
we had more rain today, but at least, Clive, it is a little bit warmer, and temperatures in Northern Ireland reached 16 degrees today. And it's actually a bit warmer than normal for the time of year across many western parts of Europe. And in southwest France, temperatures topped 30 degrees. Of course, it's not going to last, and as we change the month, we're going to change the weather. It's going to turn cooler across many western parts of Europe, but it should also be turning drier at the same time. Let's have a look at the rain, though, that we've had over the past few hours. This rain is continuing to push across Scotland. A heavier rain has been developing across England and Wales. As you can see, it's a bit further north now. And that rain will tend to slide away out into the North Sea, but we'll keep some patchy rain going across northern England. Otherwise, it should turn much drier by the end of the night. Southwesterly winds kept it mild today. They'll keep it mild overnight tonight. Temperatures ranging from around 6 to 12 degrees. But we've still got some rain to clear away from northern England first thing in the morning. After that, there'll be some sunny spells, but the showers are developing. You can see them there. They'll develop more widely through the day, and we could get some heavy thundery downpours across central and eastern parts of England. Still mild air, mind you, and temperatures tomorrow could be higher than today, actually, in Scotland. And ahead of those thundery downpours, temperatures in eastern England could reach 17 degrees. Those heavy showers fade away quickly in the evening because it's going to get wet again. We've got this area of low pressure sliding in across southern parts of the UK, bringing some heavy rain to England and Wales overnight. The winds will be strengthening as well, and into the morning we've still got gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour or more, particularly across the southern coasts of England. The winds do ease down during Friday. The rain continues across southern areas, and we could see some rain pushing back towards Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud feeding in. That will bring us a few showers around as well. And of course, it's going to be cooler on Friday because of all that cloud. Top temperature may be reaching 14 degrees in sheltered western parts of Scotland. Into the weekend, and those temperatures continue to drop away as we move into April, but it should be turning drier and we should get more sunshine around, particularly on Sunday. Clive.
Sounding good. Darren, thank you. Darren Bett there. That's it. There's more analysis, of course, of the day's main stories over on Newsnight with Kirsty Walk, just getting underway on BBC Two. Here, though, the news continues on BBC One as we join our colleagues across the nations and regions for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.
Thanks, Clive, and welcome to Look East. Tonight's top story as the hunt continues for two men after a woman is killed in her own home in Suffolk. Other residents speak of their fears. Good evening. Police are still hunting for the men who burst into 82-year-old Joy Middleditch's home in a sheltered housing complex in Pakefield wearing masks. Meanwhile, another victim of a similar raid has told Look East she's been left traumatised by the crime. Alex Dunlop has the latest.
2 days after Joy Middleditch died in hospital, 5 days after she was attacked in her own home, the police investigation is still intensive and still highly visible. Officers have found her handbag discarded nearby but are still looking for her purse. Well, they try to reassure local people. Further up the coast in Great Yarmouth, 73-year-old Teresa is far from reassured. 5 weeks ago, intruders broke into her bungalow. They stole cash, jewellery, electronics, even her address book. Her son has since increased her security with a